And I welcome everyone to Press TV's news review program, where we get in-depth in one of the day's top stories. Iran and Saudi Arabia have agreed to restore bilateral ties as part of a deal mediated by China. As the Secretary of Iran's Supreme National Security Council, speaking after days of intense negotiations with his Saudi counterpart in Beijing.
At the end of the talks, we reached a decision to start a new chapter after 7 years of severed relations between the Islamic Republic of Iran and Saudi Arabia, while considering the interests of the two countries, the security and well-being of the region, and preventing undue intervention from extra-regional forces, particularly from the West, and constant mischief by the Zionist regime in the region. We hope that this new chapter will compensate for the stagnation of relations over these last 7 years and also lead to stability and security in the region, as well as the improvement of the welfare of all its people.
Iran and Saudi Arabia will resume diplomatic relations within 2 months and reopen their respective embassies. Iran's Foreign Minister Hossein Amir-Abdollahian says a restoration of ties offers great potential for both countries, the region, and the world of Islam. The Saudi National Security Advisor also welcomed China's initiative. Beijing, meanwhile, says the restoration of relations is a victory for dialogue and peace and good news for the current turbulent world. That is, reactions have also been pouring in from elsewhere. The former Israeli Prime Minister, Naftali Bennet, says Tel Aviv's plots to isolate Iran have suffered a fatal blow.
The renewal of relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran is a serious and dangerous development for Israel and is a political victory for Iran. This is a fatal blow to the efforts to build a regional coalition against Iran.
Meanwhile, Oman and Iraq, which had both hosted previous rounds of Tehran-Riyadh talks, also held the resumption of ties. They said it helps promote security and stability in the region. Saudi Arabia severed diplomatic relations with Iran in January of 2016, and that came after Iranian protesters, enraged by the Saudi execution of prominent Shia cleric Sheikh Nimr al-Nimr, stormed its diplomatic missions in Iran. Iranian officials condemned the attack, and the perpetrators were prosecuted and sentenced to prison. And now joining us for the program is Yusuf Azizi, international affairs expert, joining us from Washington, D.C., and David Yaghoubian, professor of history from Cal State University, San Bernardino, California. Hello, gentlemen. I'd like to welcome you both to the program. David, I guess we'll start with you in sunny Southern California down there. Hope you're safe and doing well, David. Now, my initial question, what are the ramifications for this? Who are the losers and the winners of this potential reforging of ties between Riyadh and Tehran for the region and beyond, David?
To be with you as always, Daniel. You know, in terms of the losers, it's a strange news day because I find myself in complete agreement with former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennet, who proclaimed this to be a victory for Iran and a fatal blow to efforts to create an anti-Iran coalition. I also find myself agreeing for the first time, perhaps in my life, with Mark Dubowitz of the Orwellianly titled Foundation for Defense of Democracy, who proclaimed that this was a, quote, lose, lose, lose for American interests. So clearly the Zionists and the American hegemonic empire are the losers in this case. I'd say directly the Chinese government, which has shown that it can negotiate a peace agreement outside of the Indo-Pacific, as well as, of course, the nation of Iran and the nation of Saudi Arabia are going to benefit from this agreement. So now, with that said, I don't want to paint this agreement as necessarily accomplishing the important work that's going to need to be accomplished by way of the diplomacy that it's going to enable, because this basically takes us back to 2016, and therefore, you know, the issue of the genocidal war against the people of Yemen, Saudi Arabia's support for Takfiri terrorists, its oxymoronic supposed normalization with apartheid Israel. These will all be issues that Iranian and Saudi diplomats will need to work on. But as we all know, jaw-jawing is better than war-warring, if you will. And so I believe that this is truly a positive announcement, even though we shouldn't get too far ahead of ourselves in terms of concluding what it ultimately is going to bring about. Last, I'll just say briefly that this points out in sharp relief the chasm between the Chinese approach to creating stability and dialogue and motivating diplomacy and the American and Zionist approach to basically implementing their chaos strategy. That is, as they call it, constructive instability. Divide and rule, create sectarianism, motivate hate, and then better enable Zionist and American hegemony in the region. So I think this is perhaps the takeaway from today's important announcement, and we'll see where it goes from here.
Thank you, David. And Mr. Youssef Azizi, welcome to the program, sir, from Washington, D.C. Now, Mr. Azizi, it's funny that David mentioned China and the U.S., because that was going to bring me to my question to you, sir, is that we've seen China wresting influence over the years away from the U.S. In African countries, and they're working their way into West Asia very well now. We can also mention some places deep into Asia. Not to mention there's been some fractures within the European Union on the China issue. So how big of a win is this for China and its perspective and what it's trying to do against the U.S.? And a lot of people feel this is a response to the U.S., that the U.S. is the one that picked the fight with China on so many different fronts, and this is the Chinese responding diplomatically.
Yeah, absolutely right. I think the main answer for your question is about the energy market. So we know that one of the base foundation of Saudi United States relation is about the energy, which is the Saudis' role is to pumping oil to the global market and in response to get the security for the Saudi Arabia. But in the recent years, the United States dependence to the energy coming from the Middle East is absolutely going away. So nowadays, and if you look at the trends of the energy market to 2050, we see that the China's reliance of energy coming from the Middle East and North Africa in every day. In the future of the Middle East and Persian Gulf security, because they wanted to see the stability in the region, that the energy coming out to the East Asia. On the other hand, as David said, the United States and the Israeli policy toward the Muslim countries, toward the West, which is completely different. We cannot say that they wanted stability in the region. We can see the United States policy in the past 2 decades about Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and every other countries in the region. So this is the major conflict between China and United States in Persian Gulf. They are going to change their role in the Persian Gulf security. On the other hand, I can say that China's role is to make a balance between the regional power, especially Iran and Saudi Arabia, because as far as we can see, the stability and tension in the region, not only China, but also Iran and Saudi Arabia wouldn't get benefit from that. Saudi Arabia's vision of 2030 needs a huge amount of foreign direct investment. And without the stability, without the a bilateral relation with Iran, and reducing the tension with Yemen and every other players in the region, nobody would invest hugely in Saudi Arabia. So all of that, take hands to get to each other to, maintain the region stability without the United States traditional role in that region.
Thank you, Mr. Azizi. And David, I'm going to swing back over to you. It's funny that you should have mentioned Naftali Bennet. I mean, obviously he was inside our story bit there, but he mentioned that this is a fatal blow for us to try to isolate Iran in the region. In fact, one may make the argument this is a fatal blow to actually isolate Israel in the region now, depending on how far these diplomatic ties go.
I would have to agree. Now, I'll just say I believe that Bennet is with that statement, he's politicking, and this is directed against Benjamin Netanyahu, his political rival. And so, there's a domestic political motivation for this very, overt and powerful statement. But nevertheless, let's just look more broadly at what's going on globally with the continued march towards multilateralism, towards multipolarity, march back towards the actual use of actual international law as opposed to the bogus supposed rules-based international order that the Zionists and the Americans have continued to run with. And so this is I believe, truly the potential for Israel to continue to be isolated. If you watch, American mainstream media or the mainstream media from Western Europe, you get less of a sense of Israel's increasing isolation day to day. But even with that said, I guess I'll even counter the point I just made, because with the attempted judicial changes that the Netanyahu government is engaging in, even in the Western press, you see tension and the potential, that is, fears of the potential for Israel to become even more isolated, even from its strong Zionist base here in the United States. So this could indeed continue to motivate the isolation of the apartheid state of Israel. And irrespective of what happens again to Israel, there are so many critically important issues that Saudi Arabia and Iran can cooperate with in the Persian Gulf, many of them coming full circle back to eliminating the need for this supposed anti-Iran military coalition in the region.
Thank you, David. And Mr. Azizi, final thoughts with you. I'm glad David kind of gave the prelude to what with this collaboration, with some agreements and some understanding between Riyadh and Tehran, how the future, or what are the prospects of how the future in the Middle East could look like?
That's a big question. In the past decade, the United States, Israel, and Saudi Arabia wanted to limit or even completely eliminate Iran's role in the region through the security, economic, political, everything. And we can see that Iran now power in nuclear power, in drone and missiles, and in every aspect of power in the last 10 years is much more. So they don't have any option to include Iran in the regional security, in the regional political development. And I think if they can overcome their challenges in Yemen, in Lebanon, in Syria, that we can see that recently most of the important Arab countries try to reinitiate their relation with Bashar al-Assad in Syria. So if they overcome their challenges over the security dilemma, we would see that all countries in the region could benefit from this bilateral relation, especially in the economic section, but, except Israel. And as David mentioned, the Israel policy toward the Middle East is completely different. It's nations and peace, wealth, and security and stability.
All right, gentlemen, thank you both for joining us on the program. Stay safe, both of you. Mr. Youssef Azizi, their international affairs expert, joining us from Washington, D.C., and David Yaghoubian, professor of history, joining us from San Bernardino, California. Viewers, that brings us to the conclusion of this segment of your Press TV's News Review program. Thank you for tuning in, and goodbye for now.